Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to this session of self-improvement to the Quran series, which we have begun in Ramadan. Today, the passage that we are going to study is from Surah Bani Isra'il, and this passage is a rather lengthy passage, so I shall divide it into three parts, and we shall study the first part today. And this is perhaps the most comprehensive statement of morality and good morals that you can find at one single place in the Quran. In fact, if you can call this, or you can dub this passage to be the moral message of the Quran, it would be quite correct, because you will not find this moral message being enshrined so compactly and so comprehensively at the same time at one single place. Yes, there are many places in which this moral message can be seen, but perhaps this is the most comprehensive part of the Quran. And I'm just going to read out the first of these sections, the first one that we're going to study today. I'm just going to share my screen with you. So basically, these are verses 22 to 25 of Surah Bani Isra'il. And as is the case with most moral directives, whenever these directives are stressed, we know from the Quran that one very common feature of this emphasis is that the Quran tends to repeat these directives in a way that it begins a whole passage with a certain directive, and the same directive is what we found at the end of that passage also. And exactly same is the situation here, as we shall see when we finish the third part of this passage, inshallah, day after tomorrow. But the directive which starts with is the directive of Tawheed, of monotheism, of believing in one God. And you'll find that when this passage would end, it would again end with the same note that there is no God but one. So this monotheism is like a wall, is like a edifice within which all other directives are they're confined. And so therefore it shows also the importance of this directive and how basically it differentiates between a believer and a disbeliever. So the verses start off, لا تجعل مع الله إلها آخر فتقعد مذموما مخذولا. Listen, serve no other deity except God, lest on the day of judgment you are left blameworthy and helpless. So we know that the Quran was revealed in a time and in an ambience and in a background in which polytheism reigned supreme. We know there were 360 idols which were placed in the Holy Kaaba. And as a result, for centuries, the Arabs had little knowledge left of them, of the remnants of Abraham and Ishmael's teachings. So, of course, they left the Arabs on monotheism and on Tawheed, but slowly, later on, in later generations, we find that this particular monotheism, or this belief in one God, it came to be replaced slowly and gradually by polytheism. And when the Quran was revealed, this was the zeitgeist, as they would say. It was the spirit of time. And you will find that 2/3 of the Quran it's concerns with polytheism, and you'll find you'll find issues related to polytheism in abundance. And so therefore, if you're not aware of this background of the Quran, that it actually is addressing the idolaters of its times, we might tend to get a little bored, and we might also tend to have this question in mind that today, when we are living in a more monotheistic world, especially the Abrahamic religions, which account for more than half the world's population, so how can we make sense of this polytheism? So notwithstanding the fact that polytheism is still rampant, and it still is a major religion to contend with, but at the same time, we have to understand that the Quran was revealed in an environment which was replete with polytheism. So this directive actually starts off, or this model directive passage starts off with this message that you should not serve any other deity than God, because if you serve any other deity than God, then you would actually acknowledge the fact that this is information that God has given you. And unless God gives you this information, and if you make up this information yourself, then this is nothing but ascribing a lie to God. And that is precisely why The Quran is called polytheism as iftara Allah. It's imputing falsehood to God. And you have no proof of that. So, to guard oneself against all forms of polytheism, and also we should remember that at times people who are monotheists, people who belong to the monotheistic tradition, they also tend to indulge in certain subtle forms of polytheism. So we have to stand guard against polytheism, polytheistic practices, and not deliberately indulge in any one of them. Yes, we have misconceptions, but then, as I said, the Quran is the best antidote to these misconceptions. So the 2/3 of the Quran that you'll find dealing with polytheism will only make sense to today's reader if he knows that the Quran was revealed in a time, in an era in which polytheism was the real religion of a better part of the world. So the verses go on and say that if you do this, فَتَقْعُدَ مَذْمُومًا مَخْزُورًا, that if you serve other deity, if you worship other deity than God himself, then all that you would find yourself is that you'll be helpless on the day of judgment, blameworthy, and there will be no way out for you. And then positively, the next directive is regarding, as is the case in general with the Quran, that it deals with the parents right after the rights of the Almighty. So right after the rights of the Almighty, we find the next two verses dealing with the rights of the parents. And we have seen this earlier also, that in Surah Luqman, when Luqman was presenting his advice to his son, to whom he was handing over the reins of the tribe that they were in charge of, he actually started off with the rights of God, and then God himself inserted the rights of the parents. So this is a very common practice, and here you can see it's also followed. So وَقَضَىٰ رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. Your Lord has enjoined you to worship none but him and to treat your parents very well. So previously, in the previous verse, we found that the same belief of Tawheed or monotheism was stated in a negative way, in a way that was trying to absolve the Almighty of all these attributes, and people were told that they should not in any way associate partners with him. And the very next verse enjoins the very obligation that we owe to God once we acknowledge him as our creator, and that is to worship him. So وَقَضَىٰ رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ. Your Lord has enjoined you to worship none but him. You cannot prostrate before any other deity. And the next thing that you have to acknowledge right after God is وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا, that you have to treat your parents with kindness. And this is especially the case when they reach old age. So the next verse actually points this out, and it says, إِمَّا يَبْلُغَنَّ عِنْدَكَ الْكِبَرَ أَحَدُهُمَا أَوْ كِلَاهُمَا فَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفٍّ وَلَا تَنْهَرْهُمَا وَقُلْ لَهُمَا قَوْلًا كَرِيمًا. If either or both of them attain old age before you, show them no sign of impatience, nor scold them while answering. Speak to them with respect, and with softness lower arms of tenderness on them, and keep praying. So that is the next verse. So the object lesson that we have to learn from this verse is that if one of the parents or both of them reach old age in our presence, then the Quran says, فَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفٍّ, that do not show any sign of impatience. Be patient with them, be forbearing with them, understand them, because they do become slow, they do become repetitive, they do have, they do behave exactly like you might expect a child to behave. So just as they showed patience when we were growing up, and we were being groomed by them, in a similar way, when parents reach that age that they behave like children, and at times there is an uncanny resemblance between the behavior of elderly parents and young children, then adult children must show, and they must be extremely patient with them. And فَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفٍّ, as you can see from this very word, uff, here it means that do not be impatient with them. And this is the right translation of this verse. Otherwise, it is generally translated in the sense that word uff is used in the Urdu language, of course, has a different connotation. So فَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفٍّ, and then the verse actually spells out something more grave, and it says وَلَا تَنْهَرْهُمَا. Not only should you not be impatient with them, you must not scold them. And of course, this scolding and this telling off parents is often takes place because adult children don't realize that they have their own viewpoint, and the parents might have their own viewpoint, and parents at times become insistent, and as I said, they become repetitive, they forget things, and of course, they need some time also to think over. So do not scold them in any case if you feel that they are not going along with your own wishes and or your own desires. You can have your own difference of opinion, but that doesn't mean that you are rude to them. So وَلَا تَنْهَرْهُمَا. And the third clause actually then gives us the right manifesto in this regard, and it says, وَقُلْ لَهُمَا قَوْلًا كَرِيمًا. Speak to them with respect. So not only don't be rude with them, and not only don't scold them or in any way show disrespect to them, speak to them with honor, with dignity, which behooves their status. So God Almighty, we know He has created our parents in a way that they form the first seat of learning for all of us. They bring us up, they groom us, they sacrifice their lives, especially the mother. We know the services of the mother, the way she presents herself, the way she sacrifices her life and her time and so many other things, so that her children can benefit. We know this whole story, and it is a story which is found in every house. So this is what the Quran tells us, that in no way be impatient to them, because they are the ones who brought you into existence, and they are the ones who did all this for you. In fact, it goes on to say, وَخْفِزْ لَهُمَا جَنَاحَ الظُّلِّ مِنَ الرَّحْمَةِ وَقُلْ رَبِّ ارْحَمْهُمَا كَمَا رَبَّيَانِي صَغِيرًا. And with softness, lower arms of tenderness on them, and keep praying, Lord, be merciful to them the way they nursed me with love and tenderness in childhood. رَبُّكُمْ أَعْلَمُ بِمَا فِي نُفُوسِكُمْ إِن تَكُونُوا صَالِحِينَ فَإِنَّهُ كَانَ لِلْأَوَّابِينَ غَفُورًا. People, your Lord fully knows what is in their heart, is in your hearts. If you remain obedient, He is very forgiving to those who turn to Him. So this is a beautiful, I would say, a metaphor, and in fact, it's more of a simile in which parents, they are compared to small chicks, and the children actually are compared to a hen, as if just as a hen, she covers her chicks with her tender wings. In a very similar way, adult children are told that they must take their children, their own parents, under their wings and be tender and soft to them. And then this beautiful prayer that we have often listened to and we have been taught also, رَبِّ ارْحَمْهُمَا كَمَا رَبَّيَانِي صَغِيرًا, that Lord, be merciful to them, be kind to them, and just as they were kind to us and nursed us when we were growing and we were small. So this prayer is an obligation that we owe to our parents as much as we can. We have to be tender to them. We have to be soft to them. We have to be gentle with them. Yes, of course, we can have a difference of opinion, but then again, that difference of opinion doesn't mean that you have to be impolite. One's stance can be stern without one's tone being impolite. So we have to be extremely, extremely kind, and we must think about the fact that this difference of age and this difference of experience, of course, is something that we might benefit from. So it's not always that they are wrong. Yes, you might be, might have a different experience, but for grown-up children, I think the best way is that they must hear out this experience, even if they differ with them, because this experience is extremely rich. It will provide them with new insights, and then before dismissing such insights, they must reflect on these insights. They must think that, well, they have someone who have spent more time on this earth and they have more knowledge of things. So even if they have to dismiss their reasoning or their view, they must give it full weight. And this is how society is imagined by the Quran. It is a society in which there is due regard for the elderly, and there is due regard, of course, of the elderly for their children as well if they differ with them. And similarly, this difference of opinion should not be a cause of any harsh exchange of words. So, and the verse finally ends that if there is something wrong and something has happened that it was not becoming of the children, then God knows this. And if you try to remain obedient and you try to remain soft and you are, you know that you have to set right these things. In Kana lil awwabina ghafura, he's very forgiving to those who turn to him, which means that if they have done something amiss, then he would hopefully forgive them. So this brings us to an end to the study of the first part of this passage, and we shall continue it, inshallah, in the next two sessions as well. And now we are available for any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. I'll begin with a written question that I have with me. They want to ask what idols there were in Kaaba, and they say that they had heard they were prophets, they were of Prophet Ibrahim and Ismail. And they further ask, as has been told by Prophet Muhammad that he broke all the idols, was it not disrespectful towards Prophet Ibrahim? Shouldn't he have disposed those idols through any other way? I've heard that people of Makkah did not used to worship those idols, but then prayed through them. It means that as people do these days with the tombs of saints nowadays.
Well, to my knowledge and to the best of my knowledge, I may be falling short here, but I haven't heard any idols of Abraham or Ishmael being placed in the Kaaba. All that we have heard is that these asnam, as they would be called, or these idols, they were of various deities, especially of angels, various angels, because they regarded angels to be God's daughters, and they would worship them, and they would have their own names. So we have these mentioned in the Quran in Surah Najm also. أَفَرَأَيْتُمُ اللَّاتَ وَالْعُزَّى. So Lat, Uzza, وَمَنَاةَ الثَّالِثَةَ الْأُخْرَى. So Manat, or these three, were very prominent among those angels whom they worshipped as idols. And then there were other idols as well. But I don't think that they were idols of Abraham and Ishmael. And if there is some authentic information that my questioner would be having, I will be glad to study it. Well, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think that they had the statues of these prophets. Yes, what they did have, to my knowledge, is that they had made some drawings of these angels and supposedly of these prophets on the walls of the Kaaba, but not any idols.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. And Malaika is our first participant today. Malaika, please go ahead.
Thank you. From Dr. Shehzad. My question is twofold, as usual, and it has to do with dua and zikr again. So just wanted to ask you that as I find myself, I personally turn to zikr as a form of prayer a lot more than salat. And I think that the reason why I do that is because in namaz and salat, as much as I try to read translation, I feel a certain disconnect that I'm just doing actions and I'm just repetitively reciting certain verses. And most often than not, when I'm saying my namaz, I am thinking of X, Y, and Z, and then I suddenly come back to my senses, and then I start feeling really guilty, and then by the time the namaz and the actions are over, I just don't know what happened. Versus when I do zikr, I feel like as short as my whatever prayer I like to recite or whatever verse, at least I know the meaning of it. So wanted to contemplate a little bit on this, and also that I was wondering if because you see, as again we've grown up, we've been said, somebody is praying day and night for something. So this idea of quantity of prayer, as in how many times you say something, does that hold any power in terms of the effect of your prayer and the result of your prayer? Like, does one really have to count how many times they say? Maybe the intention of saying that one verse, saying it once, is so strong versus saying it 1,000 times over. So just sort of.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think if I take up your first part, the first part of your question, maybe you need to have a broader understanding of how we can actually have various options in offering the prayer. And this will make your prayer much more interesting, much more involving, and you'll find yourself being connected to God much more. So first thing that you might know, I think, and I've said this a few times, maybe in these sessions as well, is that there are certain instances. I mean, there are more than, I would say, 40%, 40% in extent of the prayer that which you can actually utter in your own language, whether it's in English or whether it's Urdu or any other language that you are comfortable with. So there are only 5 occasions in the Quran, in the namaz or the salat, which have to be said in Arabic. Rest you can say in your own language. Of course, when you say things in your own language, you are more attentive, you are more focused, and you feel overwhelmed, you feel drenched. And the other things and the things that you have to say in Arabic, they are very few. I mean, for example, Allahu Akbar is one of them. Alhamdulillah, which is the Surah Fatiha, is the second thing. And Surah Fatiha itself has profound meanings, although we do repeat it in so many times the whole day in all our prayers. But you see, it is something that is a constant prayer of guidance. And thirdly, the surah that you pray after Surah Fatiha. So these are 3 instances. Then the 4th instance is Sami Allahu liman hamida. And the 5th one is Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah when you end the prayer. So these are the 5 occasions that have to be said in Arabic, and of course they are repetitive. But again, as I said, that they are if you count them, they are much less than the other part, which you can say in your own language. So while sitting in the Qada, opening the prayer, when you say Subhanakallahumma, doing ruku, doing sujood, and sitting in between 2 sujoods or prostrations, you can say, and you can glorify God, you can thank God, you can make dua to God in your own language. And the other thing that might be of interest to you to contemplate and to also, I would say, relish regarding the prayer is that it's not just the utterances of the prayer which are worship. I mean, the postures themselves, if you start enjoying those postures and also start understanding the wisdom behind each posture. So standing before God, kneeling before Him, and prostrating before Him, and sitting before Him. So these are the 4 postures that the prayer is composed of. You stand, you kneel, you prostrate, and you sit on the ground. So each of these 4 postures, they have the feelings of worship, and they have feelings of connecting to God. Especially, I mean, if in your situation of, I mean, in the state of prostration, when you have the highest point of your body, which is your forehead, it is touching the ground. The amount of I would say comfort and soothing it has for you is unmatched and unparalleled. So it's not just the utterances, it is the postures as well, if you start reflecting on the importance of these postures. As far as counting things are concerned, I mean, this is something which is very secondary. It's more important to concentrate on what you are uttering and understanding it. Counting has become a habit in our society, in our culture, and we end up laying more stress on counting than understanding that what we are saying with our tongue. So it is essential that you say something less, but whatever you say or whatever you utter, whether it's in your heart, whether it's through your tongue, it should be something that you are able to understand. And quantity is much more superior quality is much more superior than the quantity. So I think both these things go hand in hand. The prayer has its own charm, it has its own connection, and as I said, you will really enjoy the prayer if you can, and you can speak out to God during the prayer. You see, when you end the prayer, we often raise our hands in prayer, in dua, and you might you might like to know this, that when you're sitting in the Qada in the last rakat, or even in between the 2 rakats, when you're praying a 4 rakat namaz, that is the best time which has been taught to us to actually make dua. So the whole Qada, whether it's the shorter one or the longer one, it is the best time to actually utter that dua. This raising our hands is just a special case of making some special dua. Otherwise, dua or supplication is part of, it is within the prayer. It is found within the posture of the prayer that you can do it. So again, I think there are some other things as well, but I would say that these primary things, if you could maybe reflect on them more, I do think your prayer will become much more you'll connect to God much more, hopefully, inshallah.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Thank you.
Thank you. Ruhi Rasool, you may have your question now.
Sir, my question is about the incident that took place in Ghar Hira when the Nuzul of Jibreel alayhi salam was there, and he asked Hazur sallallahu alaihi wasallam to recite Ikra bismi rabbikal ladzi khalaq. At that time, Hazur sallallahu alaihi wasallam replied, "I can't read, ana ummi. I'm illiterate." Why did he say that? He wasn't asked to write, and he was very well versed in communication, being a successful businessman.
Madam, I have given a whole lecture on this first revelation in one of my series, and this is a conventional interpretation that you are referring to. I don't agree with this interpretation, and it's something which has been brought to question. Not only its chain of narration, but also the whole text of the narrative has been questioned. And I think if you would just listen or read out some of the things that we have written on this topic, it has an entirely different picture that might emerge before you.
So, sir, the related thing is, was Alhamd Sharif, Alhamd Sharif's Nazul just after this?
As I said, I mean, this Ghar Hira incident has no basis, the way it has been presented in Hadith. So I would advise you to please look up some of the things that we have spoken and written on this topic. And the revelation of the first revelation, which is Surah Fatiha, that's an entirely different and independent issue. It's not related to Ghar Hira or the cave of Hira.
This is in Quran, Ikra bismi rabbikal ladzi khalaq.
I mean, but it doesn't say it's the first revelation. There's no such thing in the Quran. It is the Hadith which tells us that this was the first revelation.
But this incident took place, and these words are there. Ikra bismi rabbikal ladzi.
This incident has
Ana
not been
ummi as well.
No. The words are ma ana biqarin, and nana ummi is not the word, and that is something which is recorded in our Hadith, not in the Quran. And as I said, this Hadith has been critically evaluated, and it doesn't stand the test of historical criticism.
Thank you. Tariq Javed, you may ask your question now.
Doctor, we see quite detailed instructions for the children as to how they should behave with their old age parents, how softly and how patiently. But are there any instructions for old age parents, how they should deal with their children on day-to-day basis? I'm setting aside the inheritance problems, that's a separate subject. I see in old age parents, they tend to become difficult for the children, and children at that age at like 40 or 45 or 50 years of age themselves, and they are busy looking out for their children, and eventually the old age parents become difficult.
There's nothing which is mentioned with regard to the parents, because you see, parents, the connection of the parents with their younger ones is such a natural thing that in normal circumstances, when they have not grown old, their attachment with their children is incontestable. However, what does happen is that when they tend to grow old, and the children, they do become impatient. So you see, we have to understand that the Quran is not going to mention each and every detail, because so many things that they are there which are there for our own understanding, and our own human nature tells us. So the Quran either reminds us of something that might be going wrong, or it doesn't give any original guidance in these affairs, because our human nature and our own personal proclivity, all this is already found in ourselves. So you see, what the Quran does is that areas in which a person is bound to go wrong, or parents are bound to go wrong, maybe the children are bound to go wrong, so they are brought up. So remember, the Quran is not like a comprehensive document which is going to tell you everything, because most of these things are already there in our human nature. It's just going to remind you of certain things, or certain grave things that we might tend to forget.
That's good. But if it's not in Quran, then like any research or any write-up by any of the scholars of our institution, Al-Mawrid, this is a subject itself.
Right. So I have written a book which is called Modern Challenges to Parenting, and I think you might find it useful, because this is a book which relates to the challenges which parents face when they have grown-up children. So it might be of interest to you.
Yeah, definitely. I would love to read that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Baran Nashur, you may ask your question now.
My question is about the different styles of prayer, because different schools of fiqh have like different forms. For example, the Maliki, they give salam after the Imam gives the full salam, and Hanafis are following the giving salam. So can we, like, if we're not sure to follow which school of fiqh, can we just do whatever the majority is doing in the mosque if you're going to different mosques?
Yes, I would say that whenever you are in a mosque or in a congregation, then it is always better, in fact, highly recommended that you follow the Imam. If the Imam is doing what the Malikis say, you follow him. If he's doing what the Hanafis say. Because you see, at the end of the day, these two things, they don't make any difference. They are not the mandatory part of the prayer. Both of them are acceptable practices.
Okay, and just a more broad question. Do we need to follow one specific school of fiqh, or can we, let's say pick and choose what we prefer in our lives?
Well, if you are talking about, for example, understanding the Quran in various verses of the Quran, then it is always recommended that if you are in a position to compare the reasons between two scholars and accept the interpretation which appeals to your intellect. But if you are referring to schools of fiqh, like for example the Hanafites or the Shafi'ites, if you are a follower of the Hanafites, then there is no option but to follow them. But if you call yourself a Muslim, and to you all these scholars, they form a collective heritage of Muslims. So in all such cases, you can benefit from their opinions and see which one of them makes more sense to you.
So, but it's not an obligation to follow one specific school of fiqh.
No, it's not. Certainly not.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Naveed Irfan, you may ask your question.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
Sajid sir, I have question कि आपकी जो किताब है The History of Quran, इसका उर्दू में तर्जुमा है क्या?
Not yet.
ये है, इस पे कुछ काम हो रहा है आगे?
I don't think so. Not to my knowledge. I don't think anyone has attempted that as yet. But I do think that there are certain people who are summarizing this book in the Urdu language. So Ahsan, his name is Ahsan Khalid actually. So he's a person here in Pakistan, in Lahore, who is summarizing this book in Urdu.
जी, तो अल मौरिद उसे पब्लिश करेंगे.
Actually, he doesn't belong to the scholars of Al Mawrid. He is the son of Khalid Masood, a student of Ustaz Amin Islahi, and Idara Tadabbur Quran o Hadith is a famous institution. So, he is heading that institution, and he publishes the books of Ustaz Amin Islahi, particularly his Tarjuma Quran, and also he has published his father's Hayat Rasul Ummi. So I think that he is going to publish that.
And I have another question. जो जिस तरह अल्लाह ताला ने कुरान में जो स्पेसिफिक मुशरिकीन जो लफ्ज इस्तेमाल किया है वो तो वहाँ के मुशरिकीन के लिए था, लेकिन जो मुशरिक लफ्ज है उसके मायने तो वो होते हैं जो शिर्क करे, जो अल्लाह के साथ किसी और को शामिल करे. तो ईसाई जो है वो तो अल्लाह के रसूल हजरत ईसा अलैहि सलाम को उनका बेटा कहते हैं, तो एक तरीके से तो वो शिर्क हुआ, तो हम उन्हें फिर तौहीद वाले रिलीजन में कैसे काउंट कर सकते हैं?
Well, this is a very deep question. I think I've answered it previously as well. And that is because, you see, they are deviant monotheists. They themselves regard them to be monotheists. And the Quran has not accepted that. Okay, then if you regard Jesus to be the Son of God, of course, the Quran says that it is an act of polytheism. But this doesn't make them polytheists. The example is, for example, of a Muslim who is a monotheist, but he goes to shrines and he prostrates before these shrines and prays to them, like the saints, like Ali Hajwari or Nizamuddin Auliya, all these things. A Muslim goes there and he prostrates there. So we would not call that person a mushrik, because what he's doing is, and he's basically following monotheism out of his heart, but he is, led astray in practicing an act of polytheism. So this is what the Quran has done, that it has accepted on face value that they are people of the book and they are monotheists. So it's not we that we have regarded them to be monotheists. It's the Quran who has regarded them the Ahlul Kitab, and he has regarded marriage with their people, marriage with their women to be precisely allowed on this basis. So what the Quran has done is it has accepted their own claim that they are monotheists. But what we have to understand is that unless a person himself or herself says that he or she is committing polytheism, we cannot call that person a polytheist. He or she is a monotheist, and all that we can say is that she or he is doing something which is taking him or her to the brink of polytheism. So it's like a monotheist indulging in polytheism. And that doesn't make that monotheist a polytheist. All that it does is it makes him a deviant monotheist. Just as a Muslim, as I said, who is a monotheist, but he would go and prostrate on such shrines. He would do an act of polytheism. So we would not call him a polytheist. What we would say is that, well, what you're doing is an act of polytheism. So the followers of Jesus, they indulge in acts of polytheism, but they are basically monotheists because they themselves say that they are monotheists.
Thank you. Noshaba Wasim, you may ask a question now. I would request the participants to please ask their questions very concisely because we just have 3 more minutes left.
Assalamu alaikum. So my question is how to deal with teenagers, like if they are making some decision which you feel it's not good, but they want to do that way. So how to convince them and how to respect their decision?
I think it's all right. If you think that the decision that they are taking is not correct, you just present your own advice, their own suggestion, and your own experience, and then back away. Let them take a decision. Even if it is a wrong decision, they learn from their mistakes. And even if they don't learn from their mistakes, it's something that they have chosen, and this is something which God has given them. This is a right that they have. So you have to act as a parent, always back them, always support them, even if they are deviant. They're not following what you think is the right path, or maybe which is against your experience. So you give them your advice in a polite way, and then let them take their decision.
Mm-hmm. And what age do you think it's you can leave the decision to the kid? Is there some specific age? You just cannot
outline an age because this varies from society to society, culture to culture, child to child. So, it's like an adult age. As soon as a person knows right from wrong, as a boy or a girl, he or she starts to know what right and wrong are. As soon as they get to know what a good deed and a bad deed is. So this is the time when they have awareness between good and evil, and it varies in different societies, and of course, even it might vary within a family between 2 children.
Thank you. Sabah, you may have the question, and this will be the last question for today.
Assalamu alaikum. My question is related with how we use the Bible, because I've heard Yambi start speaking with lots of references to the Bible, and he uses the Bible as a proper book, just like we use the Quran. But in some places in the Bible, there are very clear injunctions that we don't really agree with. For example, related with parda, related with covering your head, and related with how the woman is inferior to the man, amongst other things as well. So I don't know how we choose, how do we say that this part of the Bible goes with our concept, because there are certain scholars that derive the rulings of parda from the Bible, and also certain other rulings. So how do we decide which part of the Bible we feel relevant to ourselves and which part we don't consider?
I think this is the best way is to accept those parts of the Bible which are in conformity with the Quran, because the Quran is the final scripture. And I can also tell you this, that there is a difference between Bible history and the Bible itself. So a lot of things that go in the Bible or which are mentioned in the Bible are not actually part of the Bible. They are parts of the opinions of scholars, or they are parts of history, and they have got mixed up in the main text. And at times you can make out what the main text is, and at times it is too much, complicated. So the best thing is that you accept whatever is in conformity with the Quran, and anything which is against the Quran cannot be accepted.
But then the part about covering the head and those things are not exactly against the Quran, and they're not exactly in conformity. So how do we decide whether?
Like, for example, what exactly is mentioned in the Bible regarding covering the head?
That the women should for sure cover the head, and that she isn't. The whole thing is something like she is inferior to the man. She is for the man, and the man is for God. Some kind of.
You have to let me know which book are you speaking of, which part of the Bible. You see, as I said, Bible is not just the divine commandments of God. A lot of today's Bible that we have today has biblical history and opinions of their own scholars integrated within it. Can you cite me the exact verse and the book that you're referring to?
I'm not able to cite it right now, but I can find it and send it to you.
Yes, please send it to me, and then I'll tell you in detail that first of all, we have to make the difference that whether it's Bible history or Bible itself. And secondly, wherever the Quran has spoken of something, I mean, if head covering is something which the Quran has, talked about, then we should listen to the Quran. I mean, whatever the Bible says, it becomes secondary.
Thank you so much. I'll try to find the exact injunction and send it to you, but your answer is satisfactory. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad, for today's session. Inshallah, we'll see each other tomorrow.
Inshallah.